Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you a recipe I came up with that has some Tex-Mex elements to it. So let's go ahead and get started. What you're going to wind up needing for this recipe is an orange, a lime, a lemon, some shallots, some garlic, serrano peppers, poblano peppers, chipotle peppers and adobo sauce, and some cilantro. We're also going to wind up making some guacamole, which is why I have the avocados, and then we're also going to use some of the cilantro to make some cilantro lime rice. The other ingredients that we're going to need for this recipe is some honey, some black pepper, cumin, oregano, mustard, and salt. The type of meat I'm using today is a thin cut top round. You can wind up using other cuts and or other choices of meats, but I've noticed this tends to work better with beef. I'm starting off by skinning the shallot and making incisions into it. I'm not completely dicing it, I'm just making incisions so that way whenever I put it in a food processor, it's easier to process. Afterwards, smash up some garlic cloves and set them to the side. Cut up a lemon and just take a small slice of it and remove the outer rind, but keep the membrane. We are also going to repeat this step for the lime and the orange. We're only going to be using a small amount from the lime, lemon, and orange itself, so that way there is enough citric acid to help break down the marbling of the meat, but that way the flavoring isn't too overbearing. We will also be using a little bit of the rind off of each of these, that way we're not completely wasting everything, and then it helps add to some of the flavor. Now that's all said and done, cut up some of the cilantro and set it to the side. With everything that you just processed, put it back into a baking tray and add a little bit of oil and give it a coat so that way it's not going to get burnt up when you put it in the oven. You're going to wind up broiling these or just baking them in the oven for around 10 minutes or until you start noticing the peppers really starting to blister. That's what we're going for here, is blistering the peppers and then processing them afterwards. While the peppers, garlic, and shallots are in the oven, process your meat or whatever meat substitute that you're using. Occasionally, check on the peppers and give them a rotation so that way they're not going to get completely burnt on one side. We want the blistering to be as even as possible on all sides of the peppers. After the peppers are done, go ahead and put them in a plastic bag and let them set for around 5 minutes so that way they have a chance to steam. That way the outer membrane is going to be easier to remove. After they steam, you should notice that they look like this. After removing the outer membrane of the pepper, go ahead and process the rest. This comes down to personal preference depending on how many seeds you want to leave in there. So if you like it with more of a kick, leave more seeds. If you like it with less of a kick, go ahead and take out all the seeds. But this recipe already has enough of a kick as is, so I prefer to remove some of the seeds. After the poblanos are processed, going to be doing the same steps for the serrano peppers. We're going to be adding all of these to a food processor, and so one of the last things that I'm throwing in is some of the chipotle peppers in the adobo sauce. Adding a little bit of the cilantro. And now I'm going to be adding the membranes of the lime, the lemon, and the orange. Also, this is where we're going to be adding some of the rinds from each of these, just to give it a little bit extra zest. For the spices, we're going to be using 1 teaspoon of pepper, half a teaspoon of cumin, half a teaspoon of oregano, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of mustard, and then lastly, 1 tablespoon of honey. I add a little bit of water to the mix so that way it doesn't give the sauce as much of a pasty consistency, but this comes down to personal preference. Just blend it in the food processor and let it do its thing. After it's done, it should look like this. The last step of the legwork is done. Go ahead and add it to the meat and give it a shake or a stir, and then just set it in the fridge to marinate. Normally, if this was a thicker cut of meat, the bare minimum I would let this marinate for is 2 hours, but because this is thin cut top round that I'm using, I'm just letting this marinate for an hour. Here, I'm cutting up some of the avocados to make the guacamole. I tend to like mine to be a little bit chunkier, so if you don't like yours to be this texture or consistency, you can process it further to smoothen it up. I would have used a shallot, but I ran out of shallots, so I'm just using an onion that I had on hand. If you don't like onions in the mix, you don't have to worry about adding them. It's down to personal preference. One of the last things that I am adding is some minced garlic and some of the juices from it. I'm also going to be adding a little bit of honey. It helps to offset the bite that the minced garlic has and adds just a little bit of sweetness to the overall flavor. Lastly, I'm adding a pinch of salt and then some of the juice from the lime and some of the juice from the lemon. Last step, in a pan on high heat with oil, add the meat. You're going to cook this for around 3 minutes on high heat. Afterwards, reduce the heat and cover with a lid. In total, the cook time should run you around 10 minutes. You can wind up letting the sauce concentrate down a little bit further, but I like to have a little bit of sauce in mind so that way I can add it to the dish afterwards. And here's the finished product. Hope you enjoy.